parade ready for inspection, sir.
The men are not being warned of the purpose of this inspection?
No, sir.
Carry on, Captain.
Thank you, sir. Carry on, Sergeant Major.
On the word of command, the hem of the kilt we grasp firmly in both hands. Kilts, grasp! Right. Hands, raise!
Well, it's an unusual film talk, to say the very least, but here we are in lockdown and we're using the marvels of technology to get film talk back on the big screen, and I'm delighted to say we're joined by the ever-fantastic Morris Bright MBE, who's joining us for this lockdown film talk. And Morris, we're going to add another fantastic movie to our list, of the ever-growing list of the top 100, in our opinion. What's your contribution for Film Talk this week?
Well, I think it kind of goes with what's going on at the moment. Everyone's feeling a bit sort of low with the lockdown, so they tend to be watching a lot more comedy, and there's been a bit of resurgence in the popularity of the carry-on films. Lots of people talking about them online. Not that they ever lost their popularity with me, of course, though some do tend to last, if you like, a little bit better than some of the others. There were 31 of them in total, 30 in that first 20-year stretch between 1958 and 1978, and they came back and tried it again with Carry On Columbus in 1992. Although, as June Whitfield, one of the actresses in the film, said it should have been called Carry Off Columbus. But that aside, and it wasn't all that bad, but that aside, so you had the first 30 films, and some of them tend to hold up slightly better than the others. And the one that I've chosen is Carrying Up the Khyber. By coincidence, it's literally halfway through the series. I think it's film under 16, and it was made literally 68, halfway between the beginning and the end of the first big run. And it was the highest UK box office earnings for British film that year as well. And it's generally regarded as being one of the better ones. And that's probably because, like in any form of film or humour, if you deal with a subject that's already dated because it's about history, it never dates. So it tends to last better than perhaps some which are more of their time and now look a little bit dated. But also Up the Khyber is a finely scripted film and finely acted and very, very funny.
I don't know whether Your Highness has heard it or not, but there's a ridiculous rumour circulating to the effect that the fearless soldiers of the third foot and mouth, the dreaded devils in skirts, are wearing garments such as those underneath their kilts.
Oh, really? How absurd.
The rebels want to take back what they feel is rightly theirs, and the British are sort of ensconced still in their mansions and keeping their lips very British and very stiff and very upper still. And it's that kind of final conflict, and written so beautifully well by Talbot Rothwell, who, I suppose, the king of the innuendo, really. He wrote, I think, over 20 of the films. He himself had an interesting background. He was a prisoner of war in the Second World War with Peter Butterworth, of all people. And so he was able to write sort of films with a bit of a historical background. This one went back all the way to the 1890s. But it's really very funny. And even from the names from Lord and Lady Rough Diamond, played by Sid James and Joan Sims, to the Qazi of Calabar, played by Kenneth Williams. And they all really sort of, I'm not to say handed up, but they really played the parts to the full. So Sid was very much sort of your archetypal end of the empire, we're going to go or we're going to collapse, we're going to fight them out. And then Kenneth Williams was very sort of over the top and doing his usual character he would do. You see, we don't like the British, but it was all very sort of in his Indian character, the Qazi of Calabar. So it was very, very funny. And a lot of in-jokes there. You've got that great gag where they bang the big gong and someone turns around and says, "Rank stupidity," which was funny because all the films were made by Rank at Pinewood Studios. And of course, most of the film was made at Pinewood Studios, but of course they did have to go on location because they were trying to, they had to try and recreate the Khyber Pass. And so they went on the furthest location trip that the Carry-Ons had ever gone to, because previously they'd gone to Slough and Maidenhead and Windsor, but they hadn't
all
gone
the exotic locations, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think they went down to Camber Sands for Follow That Camel, but they hadn't gone very far. But they did, of course, have to recreate the Khyber Pass, and it took them all the way up to Snowdonia. all places, which, according to Angela Douglas, who plays the Princess Jelly, and who's still a very good friend to this day, she said it was terribly cold up there. She said it was really unpleasant. It was raining and it was freezing cold, and it was very difficult up there. But of course, it doubled for the Khyber Pass. And bless, when the film came out, a chap in his late 80s wrote to the producer, Peter Rogers, saying, "I've just been to see your film, Carrying Up the Khyber, and it brought back many happy memories for me. You know, I remember standing there on patrol, just where you were filming." He said, "It brought it all back to me." And Peter said, "I didn't want to write back to him and say we filmed in Snowdonia, because either would have upset him, or it means he was in the wrong place when he was standing on patrol."
I was only trying to keep warm.
Oh, so you're cold, are you?
Perishing. The way the wind whistles up the pass.
I'm sorry to hear that, Widow. Maybe you'd like me to get you a hot water bottle.
Oh, how very kind. As a matter of fact, I already have one.
The film looks very good. It's one of the very few films that I've seen on the big screen of the Carry-Ons. And I remember seeing it in 1995 when the Barbican were doing a big showing and Peter Rogers was there. And on a big screen, it looked very good. And I always say to people, try where possible to see a film on a big screen. But of course, most of the Carry-Ons have never been seen on a big screen. But if you're going to, you want to do a film like Up the Khyber, because the costumes were glorious. The way they built all the sets was lovely. It looked very expensive. And as I've said, the actual scenes on location, it did look like the Khyber Pass. So never mind the double entendre and the very clever, witty script, and also be able to see a Carry-On looking good. Because people always say, oh, the Carry-On's cheap films. Cheap films. And the producers said, hold on a minute, they're not cheap films. They are inexpensive to make. And we use the best people. And in fact, he used to use Alan Hume. Alan Hume was a cinematographer and was up for an Oscar, I think, for Runaway Train. So they used the very best cinematographers. And he said, it's because I use the best crew that I can make an inexpensive film in 6 weeks.
And it's not just the cinematography. I mean, you look at the costumes in Carry On Cleo were for the big 20th Century Fox Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor production that was at Pinewood for a while, then moved to Rome. But they were using some of those amazing costumes too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, Peter Rogers, as I say, the producer, never wanted to turn down a good offer, whether it be to rehash a joke from a previous script, because let's be honest, when you think about the films themselves, they never went on to television until 1968. They weren't deemed as being of good enough quality till 1968. So when they did go on, they went on 7 years after the film release, which was the rules in those days for the gap between a film going out and going on to television. And people wouldn't remember, they don't have the access to a film at any time, or a DVD or VHS as they used to have. They can't go through each film like nowadays they can say, oh, you've used that joke in more than one film. So he was more than happy to rehash a joke, as was told with Rothwell, the writer, and also to rehash costumes. And as you say, Cleopatra, that big multi-million pound, even in those days, film that was being made at Pinewood at the time, they were able to get access to all sorts of costumes. I believe Sid James and Carry On Cleo wore the costume that Richard Burton had worn at some stage too. So it did happen with the costumes and the sets, and certainly Carry On Up the Khyber looks particularly grand. They shot a lot of it in and around the gardens at Pinewood, which in itself is a mansion house, and they adapted the back of that mansion house to make it the scene where at the end the whole mansion was coming down during the dining room, famous dining room scene, where they're all sitting there trying to be absolutely British, and never mind that there are bombs coming through and the band's getting knocked out and the concrete and the plaster and the food. They will sit there and carry on eating their meal because that's what the British do. And Joan Sims at one stage, I think it was an ad lib, something fell on her head and she said, oh, we're absolutely plastered.
Julia! I see you've got a little plaster.
And there's Peter Butterworth who's looking around thinking, they're completely raving mad, which kind of summed it up nicely. But there were such great actors in it as well. I mean, Terry Scott was in there. Roy Castle, who perhaps would have played the part that Jim Dale would have played, but Jim Dale had come out at that stage for a short while and was to return again, I think for one more, the Karen Again Doctor. Julian Holloway, son of Stanley Holloway, was there. Barbara was out for a while. I think she was actually, if I remember rightly, doing a lot of stage work, some of which took her to America. And so they brought in Angela Douglas for a while. And Angela was to become, but wasn't at that stage, the wife of the late Kenneth More, who was the highest paid British actor in the 50s after Dirk Bogarde. So she came in there and she looked absolutely wonderful as well. But as I say, it wasn't just the costumes, it was the script as well. They had one or two issues with the script, of course. Back here, was played by Cardew Robinson. Originally, Peter Rogers wanted Tommy Cooper to play the fakir. And in fact, there's a lovely shot somewhere of Tommy Cooper coming to visit Roy Castle, his mate, on the set to have a look around. But because he was doing a one-man show touring, and that was where the money was in those days, he couldn't fit it into his schedule. So they had Cardew Robinson instead. And Peter Rogers, the producer, had an issue with the censor because there used to be not games, but there used to be, they put lines into films and the censor would say, sorry, no, you can't have that line. Not appropriate, doesn't work, or it's too rude. And we're talking about 1968. And there was a line in there which was after Cardew Robinson does his performance, which said, oh, he's a miserable fakir. And no, the censor said, no, can't have that. Just sounds a little bit too much like, no, can't take that. So, well, can we put this one in instead? And he says, what's that? And he said, well, the fakir does his performance, and Bernard Bresslaw claps and says, fakir, off.
I will now remove the second stool.
Bring on the dancing girls. Get rid of this idiot. Fakir, off.
And they got away with that in 1968. And it's absolutely brilliant because the pause is just long enough between fakir and off to make it sound as though, well, no one could have been possibly offended in 1968. So those barterings went on between the producer and the censors of the time. So it's rather lovely, and it has some rather fun in stories like that. And those kind of things really make me chuckle.
Our good friends at Carry On Blogging, for example, are very popular and are doing a lot to keep it alive. And they had a vote recently, and I think Carry On Khyber was one of the most popular Carry On movies ever produced. I mean, not just is that film one of the most popular films, I think, isn't it in the BFI Top 100 or something, but also the Carry On franchise, even now, and they haven't been making them for about 40 years, is still so popular. Where's the popularity coming from?
Well, of course, you've got various channels like ITV3 that play them a lot. Film 4 plays some of them. And you've got, of course, the box sets on the DVD. You had the VHS videos all those years ago. And so another generation gets an opportunity to see what made the previous generations laugh. And I think I may have said earlier that some of the 31 films have lasted better. And that's why you've got this online competitions going on, particularly at a period of lockdown when there's online competitions going on about everything. But the Carry On one's become very popular. 24,000 followers now. You get 3,500 people will vote. There's a daily vote to see who's the best Carry On actor, what's the best film, etc. Carry On Up the Khyber got pipped to the post. And actually the one that won was Carry On Camping. But for me, Up the Khyber has something which just kind of brings all the very best about what we perceive to be the British, but in a funny way. In other words, it's the end of the empire, and we're not surprised if it was these kind of people running it. It wasn't, but those were the characters. And there were some great references too within some of the lines of what was going on in Britain at the time. She would die a death of 1,000 cuts, and he goes, "Well, that's okay. The British are used to cuts." So there was a bit of satire going on at the time, which is probably why it's come full circle. But certainly, there's a lot of love and affection still for the series and for some of those in the series. And I think Up the Khyber is right up there. And of course, you've got to remember at the time, what else was being made there? At the time, they were making Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in other parts of Pinewood. And there's this lovely images of Dick Van Dyke, who's come over to see what they're filming out there. One of the opening scenes where they do the polo match is actually on the Pinewood lawn. And he's there having a chat with Sid James, and he's having a chat with Joan Sims. And Joan is getting an autograph. I don't know if it's for her or for someone she knows, but it's wonderful, isn't it? When you see actors and actresses who you think, oh, they wouldn't do that sort of thing. And meeting someone else who's a hero saying, can I have your autograph? Can I have your autograph? So I do think I love that sort of peer-to-peer adulation. So it seemed to be a happy film. It seemed to go very well. And everyone I spoke to and have spoken to who was ever part of its production, whether behind the scene or camera, said it was a very, very happy film to make.
Fantastic. And that's all the evidence you need to make it part of our top 100 greatest films ever made. A great addition to our Film Talk Top 100.
I hope you take the opportunity to see it and give it a try and have a jolly good chuckle along the way.
Morris, thank you very much indeed for joining Film Talk this week and bringing such a fantastic film to our list, Carry On Up the Khyber. A great addition. Thank you, Morris.
Thank you, Richard.